These are some of the craziest mistakes in human history. We're here and we want to know what's here. The problem is too much space. We cannot send humans for now, so we send satellites remotely controlled from here. Until now, we've sent around 50 of them. Some were successful and brought us cool maps, and some were not. But one of them was an embarrassing failure. Meet the Mars Climate Orbiter, or MCO. This guy was supposed to be launched to Mars, then settle into an orbit at 226 kilometers above the surface, collect climate data, map the surface, and many more. And also, it was cheaper. By cheaper, I mean $312 million, which is apparently cheap by NASA standard. So on December 11th, 1998, MCO gets launched to Mars to intercept the planet after 9 months worth of trip. Now, if you've never been to space, which I have, you need occasional redirection to keep yourself on track. And that's even harder if you have an even mass distribution somewhere. And that was the problem with the orbiter. It had an evenly balanced solar panel. Now the system that handled this is pretty complicated, but every adjustment needs to be sent to NASA so they can correct the path, because a slight variation could mean a miss by kilometers over months. But the operators at NASA are pretty competent. They're gonna make a good use of my tax money and won't destroy the satellite because of one little mistake, said a taxpayer in America. You see, the satellite was made by this company's engineers, and they like to use the imperial units, namely pound seconds. And these guys at NASA like to use the metric units, namely Newton seconds. And 1 pound force equals 4.45 newtons. This means the satellite sent data in pound seconds, while NASA thought it was in Newton seconds. And over the next 9 months, the orbiter veered off the right path little by little, until it reached Mars and passed its target orbit, coming in at 57 kilometers deep inside the Martian atmosphere, which it wasn't supposed to handle. And just after 4 minutes, the signal disappeared. And all we can do is speculate that the spacecraft either burned up or bounced into deep space, never to be heard from again. A man by the name Mao Zedong wanted to transform China by making it leap a great leap, but the leap faced an unconventional enemy, the sparrow. This capitalist bird was destroying around 9 million kilograms of grain per year, and Mao was having none of that. So he launched the Smash Sparrows campaign, aimed at destroying the sparrow population in China. And the campaign became a nationwide movement. So by his order, citizens mobilized with military precision, and they were ruthless. Some would stand on rooftops banging pots, pans, and drums, creating so much noise that the sparrows could never land, forcing them to fly until they literally dropped from exhaustion. Others would destroy their nests, smash the eggs, and kill every fledgling, while the rest hunted them down with shotguns and slingshots. And the campaign was relentless, and within 2 years, between 1 and 2 billion sparrows were killed in the greatest genocide carried out against birds. And at this point, Mao seemed to have won the war. Mao won, Sparrow 0, but not for too long. Psych! You see, grains were not the only thing that the sparrows were feeding on. In fact, it wasn't their main food. Sparrows primarily ate insects like locusts and grasshoppers, keeping their populations at low levels. But when the sparrow population was decimated, there was no predator to keep the insect population in check, and the result was a locust plague of biblical proportions. Swarms of locusts descended upon China's rice and wheat fields, devouring something close to 23 million metric tons of crops. And China would go from the Great Leap to the Great Famine. And in combination with increased seizure of remaining grain by the government in severe drought, around 45 million people would lose their lives, of which 2 million can be directly attributed to this campaign. This exotic fella is Emperor Joseph of the Holy Roman Empire, and he has a problem with Prince Frederick of Prussia. So Joseph wanted an alliance, one that would provide him with protection if war was ever to happen. And coincidentally, the Russians also wanted one to help with their beef with Turkey. So both of them signed a mutual protection treaty. And only after 6 years, the Ottomans declared war on Russia. So Joseph takes 100,000 men with him and marched towards the Ottomans. But this campaign was already a disaster. First, the army was a linguistic nightmare, since it was composed of multiple nationalities, many of whom could not understand each other. And to add to that, on their way to the Ottomans, infectious disease spread in the army and took the lives of 20,000 men. With this loss on his hands, Joseph retreats and establishes a defensive position in the town of Karansebes, whatever, overlooking the Ottoman army beyond this river. Soon, the day turns into night and everyone goes to get some Z's, but not a group of these like cavalry. They were itching for some action. So they cross the river looking for the rogue Ottomans. On their way, they come across a group of merchants who offered them some alcohol. So they accept and it's party time. A few hours later, a group of Austrian infantry also crosses the river and finds the now very intoxicated cavalry, and they make a demand to share some of the liquor with them. But the cavalry refuses, and this starts a heated argument, to the point that the cavalry builds a makeshift fortifications around the barrels. And one thing leads to another, and one soldier lets out a shot, and soon after all hell breaks loose and everyone is firing at each other. And right when you think things couldn't be more messed up, the infantry decides to pull a prank. I hate this. This could go on forever. Yeah, I know. But I think I have an idea. And what is that? What if we start shouting Turks, Turks? So they think the Turks are here and we scare them off. So one man after the other, the whole infantry starts shouting Turks, Turks, and panic sets in among the drunk cavalry, and they immediately retreat back to the camp. As the drunk cavalrymen gallop back to the camp, they get mistaken for Ottoman cavalry by the already agitated army at the camp, and to add insult to injury, one of the cavalrymen shouts, "Halt, halt," in Germany, which the soldiers mishear as Allah, Allah, and become even more convinced that the Turks are encroaching in. And while all of this was unfolding, the emperor was sleeping in his tent, which he wakes up from in confusion and surprise. And in chaos, he orders his men to fire the cannons, cutting down the retreating cavalry. In the aftermath, around 10,000 men lost their lives, and just 2 days later, the real Ottomans arrived at the town and captured it with no resistance. Once upon a time, the Brits came all the way from here to here and colonized India. But in the late 1800s, another contender came for the spot, the cobras, especially Delhi, which was basically the headquarters of the Cobra Mafia. So as a solution, the British government put a bounty on the cobra's head, and soon after, people started hunting cobras down, and dead cobras poured in by the thousands, effectively dwindling their populations. Great success, at least at first. But then after some time, out of nowhere, more cobras started appearing everywhere, despite the Indians delivering huge numbers of dead cobras. And the Brits were so confused. You see, as it turns out, people were running the scam of the century. What they did was breed cobras in large numbers, kill some, then present them to the government to receive the bounty. But when the Brits discovered multiple farms, they cancelled the program and called it a day, which is even dumber, because with the bounty gone, the cobra breeders own thousands of now worthless snakes, and rather than killing them, they released their excess inventory into the streets, and as a result, the cobra population tripled and became even worse. And fun fact, this incident is where we get the term the Cobra Effect from. In 1741, this Russian guy stumbled on this icy land and said, "Oh, look, land," and set markets there. Then over the next 125 years, more Russians came and settled, and called it Russian America. But was it a colony? Not really. At its peak, the place had a population of only 700 Russians, who were basically there for the beavers they hunted near extinction. But what are 700 Russians compared to the 3 million angry Brits living next door in Canada, who wanted to expand west? And the Russians knew they could not defend it. Plus, their king back home was losing wars, and Russia was in deep debt and they needed money. So in 1867, Russia struck a deal with the US and sold the land for only $7.2 million. And for the next 30 years, the Americans basically ignored Alaska. But everything changed in 1869 when a huge amount of gold was discovered there. And following that, in 1968, oil. Lots of it. And now Alaska is worth trillions. Even though Vladimir Putin has downplayed the historical loss as not a big deal, I'm pretty sure Russia has been punching the air ever since.